The sharp sting of the cold air inside Southern Prime Meats bit into James Carter's skin, as if the very building wanted to remind him he was just a cog in a machine, a number on a list. The clang of machinery, the buzz of saws, the low hum of conveyor belts, they all formed the relentless, almost hypnotic soundtrack of his life for the past 23 years. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stop, where the outside world faded away, and where the smell of raw meat and bleach soaked into your clothes, into your skin, and even into your dreams. James was 49 years old, a tall, broad-shouldered man with rough, weathered hands and eyes that told a story of quiet suffering and resilience. His skin glistened with sweat under the harsh fluorescent lights, and every joint in his body seemed to ache from years of hard labor, cutting, lifting, stacking, cleaning. He was a man who had always believed in hard work, family, and dignity, even when life tried to strip those things away. As he moved methodically along the line, trimming fat from large cuts of beef, he glanced up at the clock. 5:37 p.m. Just an hour and a half left on his shift, and then he'd head home to his wife Clara and their teenage daughter Jasmine. He could already hear Clara's voice in his head. "James, you've got to slow down. You're not a young man anymore." But slowing down wasn't an option. Not when the bills kept piling up, not when Jasmine was starting to talk about college applications. He paused for a moment, feeling the ache in his lower back flare up like a knife twisting in his spine. His hands trembled slightly, a dull reminder that the years were catching up with him. The white supervisors often walked past him without a word, barely even acknowledging his presence. And when they did speak, it was usually a barked command, a reminder that he wasn't one of them. He was the help, the quiet black man who did his job and kept his head down. But something felt different that day. There was a strange tension in the air, a coldness that seemed to seep deeper than the chill of the refrigerated room. James could feel the stares, the way some of the younger workers whispered when they thought he wasn't listening. Then, as if to confirm his unease, Robert "Bob" Stevens appeared. Bob was the plant manager, a man in his early 60s with a face like worn leather and a voice that could cut through steel. He always wore the same stained baseball cap, and his belt buckle gleamed under the lights like a badge of authority. "Carter." Bob's voice snapped like a whip, echoing across the room. James straightened up, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yes, sir?" Bob didn't smile. He never did. He jerked his thumb toward the hallway leading to his office. "Need a word with you. Now." The other workers avoided James's gaze as he followed Bob down the narrow corridor. His stomach twisted into knots, and his mind raced with questions. What did I do? Is something wrong with my paperwork? Bob's office was small, cluttered, and smelled like old coffee and chewing tobacco. Folders were stacked haphazardly on the desk, papers spilling onto the floor. The American flag on the wall was faded, the edges curling like it had been there since the Reagan administration. Bob didn't sit down. He crossed his arms and looked at James like a man delivering a verdict. "James, I'm gonna get straight to it. We're letting you go." The words hit James like a punch to the chest. "Letting me go?" After all these years, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. Bob's face didn't change. "It's not personal. The company's cutting back. You know how it is, times are tough, budgets are tight." But James knew it wasn't about budgets. He could feel it in Bob's eyes, in the way the man couldn't look him in the face. This wasn't about numbers, it was about color. About a man like him being too old, too black, too easy to replace with someone younger, whiter, cheaper. James stood there, fists clenched at his sides, a storm of emotion swirling inside him, rage, betrayal, disbelief. But he didn't let it show. He couldn't. Not here, not now. "So, that's it?" he asked quietly. Bob shrugged, as if it was nothing more than a weather report. "You'll get your last paycheck on Friday. That's all I can do." "You're a good worker, James, but it's just business." Business. That word felt like poison in James's mouth. He left the office in a daze, barely hearing the sounds around him. The machines kept running, the workers kept moving, but for James, the world had come to a standstill. He stepped outside into the blazing Alabama sun, blinking against the harsh light. For a long moment, he just stood there, staring at the cracked pavement beneath his boots. The sky above was a brilliant blue, mocking in its beauty. His hands hung at his sides, empty now, useless. He thought of Clara. Of Jasmine's college dreams. Of the mortgage payment due next week. And for the first time in a long time, James Carter felt truly powerless. But fate, that unseen force that twists lives in ways we never expect, was already at work. Because at that very moment, hundreds of miles away in Houston, Texas, a woman named Rebecca Miller, a sharp, ambitious HR director at Prime Harvest Foods, one of the largest meat companies in the country, was flipping through resumes, looking for workers with real experience. Her eyes skimmed over names, barely registering them, until she saw something that made her pause. James Carter. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to change a man's life. And James didn't know it yet, but his story was far from over. James Carter sat in his small, dimly lit living room, staring at the yellowing eviction notice on the coffee table. The air smelled faintly of the fried chicken Clara had tried to cook earlier, but the food sat untouched on their plates, growing cold under the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Jasmine had gone to her room hours ago, quietly closing the door behind her, and James knew she was probably scrolling through her phone, wondering what kind of future she had left when her father had just lost his job. Clara sat across from him, her face lined with worry, her hands wringing the hem of her floral apron. "James, we'll figure something out." "We always do," she said softly, though her voice shook with uncertainty. James didn't answer. He just stared at the notice, the words blurring together in his vision. He'd worked at Southern Prime Meats for 23 years, more than half his life, and now, in the span of a single afternoon, it had all been ripped away. He thought of all the extra shifts he'd worked, the holidays he'd missed, the birthdays spent on the line instead of with his family. He thought of Bob Stevens, the manager who'd fired him without a hint of remorse, and he felt a burning in his chest, a weight that pressed down on him like a cinder block. But more than anger, what James felt was fear, a deep, gnawing fear that he'd let his family down. That he'd never find another job at his age, with his aching back and worn hands. That he was just another black man discarded by the system, invisible, unwanted, replaceable. He closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the sleek, glass-walled offices of Prime Harvest Foods, Rebecca Miller was leaning back in her chair, a cold cup of coffee in her hand. She was exhausted, overworked, and frustrated by the endless stream of resumes landing on her desk, names that blurred together, none of them standing out. Prime Harvest was a giant in the meat industry, known for its cutting-edge facilities and high standards. They prided themselves on finding the best talent, the workers who could handle the pressure of a fast-paced, demanding environment. And lately, they'd been desperately seeking experienced hands to help open a new processing plant in Houston, a state-of-the-art facility that could change the game for the company. As Rebecca scrolled through the list, a name caught her eye: James Carter. His work history was impressive: 23 years at a meat processing plant, a steady record, no major incidents. But what struck her most was the note at the bottom of his resume, a brief, handwritten line that read, "Willing to work hard. Just need a chance." Rebecca frowned, intrigued. There was something raw and honest about it. She clicked on his file, reading through his details more carefully. Alabama. Southern Prime Meats, terminated after 23 years. She felt a flicker of something, a gut feeling she'd learned to trust over the years. She picked up the phone and dialed her assistant. "Get me James Carter on the line. I want to talk to him. Now." Back in Alabama, James was sitting in silence when his phone rang. He stared at it for a moment, unsure whether he had the strength to answer. But something, a whisper of hope, perhaps, made him pick it up. "Hello?" he said, his voice rough and tired. "Mr. Carter?" a woman's voice asked, crisp and professional. "Yes, speaking. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm the Director of Human Resources at Prime Harvest Foods. I came across your resume, and I wanted to talk to you about a potential opportunity." James sat up straighter, his heart racing. "Prime Harvest Foods? In Houston?" "That's correct. We're opening a new facility, and we're looking for experienced workers. Your background is exactly what we need." I understand you were recently let go from your previous job? James hesitated, the shame washing over him again. Yes, ma'am. After 23 years. I see, Rebecca said, her tone gentle but firm. Well, James, I'd like to offer you an interview. We can set up a video call this week, and if it goes well, we can discuss relocation assistance and a potential offer. James's hands trembled as he clutched the phone. This couldn't be real. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll be ready. As the call ended, James sat frozen, staring at the phone in disbelief. Clara rushed over, her eyes wide. Who was that? It was a job offer, James said, his voice shaking. Prime Harvest. They want to interview me. For the first time in days, a spark of hope flickered in the Carter household. But James knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. He'd have to leave everything behind, his home, his friends, the only life he'd ever known. And even if he got the job, there would be challenges, obstacles, and skeptics waiting for him in Houston. Still, as he sat there holding Clara's hand, James felt something stirring deep inside him, an old, familiar feeling he thought he'd lost long ago. It was determination. And no matter what lay ahead, he was ready to fight for his family, for his future, and for the chance to finally be seen not as a number or a color, but as a man who had value. This was only the beginning. The day of the interview arrived faster than James could have imagined. He sat in the small kitchen of their house in Alabama, nervously tapping his fingers on the table while Clara adjusted the camera on the old laptop they'd borrowed from Jasmine's school. It was a modest setup, peeling wallpaper in the background, a flickering fluorescent light above, but James had put on his best shirt, the one he wore for church on Sundays. As the clock struck 10 a.m., the screen lit up, and there she was, Rebecca Miller, the poised HR director with sharp eyes and a warm smile. She greeted him professionally, but James couldn't help but notice the slight raise of her eyebrows when she saw the humble kitchen in the background. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," Rebecca said, her voice smooth and steady. "Good morning, ma'am," James replied, sitting up straighter. They began with the basics, his work history, his skills, the years of experience he'd racked up working the bone saw, operating the grinders, supervising the cutting floor. James spoke clearly, his voice steady but modest. He described how he'd trained new hires, how he'd learned to fix the machines when the maintenance crew was short-staffed, how he'd stayed late countless times to finish shipments. But it was when he talked about his family, his wife, Clara, his daughter, Jasmine, that his voice cracked slightly, betraying the deep emotions beneath. "I just want to provide for them," he said softly. "That's all I ever wanted." Rebecca watched him carefully. She wasn't just looking at a resume, she was looking at a man who had been overlooked, discarded, and yet, here he was, still standing, still fighting. After an hour of questions, Rebecca leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Carter, you're exactly the kind of person we want on our team," she said finally. "This won't be easy, the work is fast, the standards are high, and the city is different. But I believe you can handle it." James's breath caught in his throat. Clara, sitting just out of frame, clasped her hands tightly, tears welling in her eyes. "We'd like to offer you a position at our new Houston facility," Rebecca continued, her tone firm. "Full benefits, relocation assistance, and a sign-on bonus to help you get settled." For a moment, James couldn't speak. The room seemed to tilt, the air growing thick with disbelief. He finally managed to whisper, "Thank you." "Thank you so much." Rebecca nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'll have the paperwork sent over today. Welcome to Prime Harvest, Mr. Carter." As the call ended, Clara threw her arms around James, and they sat there, crying in each other's arms, the weight of years of struggle beginning to lift, just a little. But the real work was just beginning. The move. 2 weeks later, the Carters packed up their entire lives into a battered U-Haul truck, leaving behind the small town in Alabama where James had grown up. As they drove toward Houston, James stared out the window at the endless highway, a knot of anxiety and excitement in his chest. Jasmine sat in the back, earbuds in, scrolling through her phone with a mixture of boredom and curiosity. She wasn't sure what to expect in Houston: new school, new friends, a new life. Clara sat beside James, clutching a folder of important papers: James's new employment contract, the lease for the tiny apartment they'd found online, and a few photos from home. The drive was long and exhausting. They stopped at gas stations where James felt the eyes of strangers lingering on him a little too long, especially when he was the only black man in the lot. They ate cheap sandwiches and drank watered-down coffee, their savings dwindling with every mile. But when they finally crossed the state line into Texas, a strange sense of hope bloomed in James's chest. This was it, a new beginning. First day on the job. The prime harvest facility was like nothing James had ever seen. It was massive, gleaming metal equipment, automated systems, conveyor belts running smoothly under bright LED lights. The Houston plant was a far cry from the old, grimy cutting floors of Southern Prime Meats. James felt like an outsider at first. The majority of the workers were younger, a mix of Hispanic and white employees who glanced at him curiously as he walked through the floor in his hard hat and safety vest. On his first day, the plant manager, a tall, sharp-eyed man named Derek Lawson, met him at the entrance. "James Carter, right?" Derek said, extending a hand. "Heard a lot about you. We're glad to have you here." James shook his hand firmly, nodding. "Thank you, sir. I'll give it my best." Derek gave a tight smile. "I hope so. This is a high-output facility, Mr. Carter. We don't slow down for anyone. You'll have to prove you can keep up." James felt a surge of determination. "I understand, sir. I'm ready to work." But the first week was brutal. The machines were faster, the quotas higher, the expectations relentless. James's muscles ached at the end of every shift, his hands sore from gripping the equipment. Some of the younger workers whispered behind his back, calling him old man, muttering that he wouldn't last a month. And yet, every morning, James showed up early, prepared, determined. He asked questions when he didn't know something. He stayed late to learn the machines. He watched how the younger guys worked, absorbing every detail. It wasn't long before Rebecca Miller herself stopped by the plant to check on him. "How's it going, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice carrying over the hum of the machinery. James wiped the sweat from his brow and grinned, a tired but genuine smile. "It's hard work, ma'am. But I've been through worse. I'm not quitting." Rebecca nodded, impressed. And deep down, James knew this was his shot. And he wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of James's life. Every morning, he woke up at 4:30 a.m., long before the sun cracked the Houston skyline, pulling on his uniform with aching muscles and a heart heavy with pressure. The prime harvest facility was relentless, the machinery louder, the pace faster, and the expectations unforgiving. James found himself struggling to keep up with the younger workers. His wrists throbbed from the rapid cutting motion required by the automated slicers. His back ached from bending over conveyor belts for hours. The heat in the packaging area was stifling, sweat pouring down his face as he hauled crates of meat onto pallets. But it wasn't just the work, it was the whispers, the looks, the quiet jokes that cut deeper than any blade. "Old man slowing down the line again," James overheard one day as he tried to recalibrate a finicky grinder. "Bet he was just a charity hire. Some diversity program or something," another worker sneered. It stung. It burned. James knew he was the only black worker on his shift, the one who looked different, who spoke with the slow Alabama drawl, who didn't have a fancy degree or a high-tech resume. Even the supervisors seemed to overlook him. Derek Lawson, the plant manager, often barked orders at the younger, flashier workers but rarely spoke to James beyond a curt nod. When a new line opened up an opportunity for leadership, James's name wasn't even mentioned. At home, Clara tried to soothe his worries. "James, you're doing everything you can. It's just gonna take time." But late at night, as she drifted off to sleep, James lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of their tiny apartment, wondering if he'd made a mistake. Was this really his second chance, or just another trap, another reminder that no matter how hard he worked, some doors stayed shut? A spark of change. Then, one sweltering afternoon, everything changed. The plant was behind schedule. A critical shipment to a major retailer was at risk, and the entire floor was in chaos. Machines malfunctioned, the vacuum sealer jammed, and the backup team was nowhere to be found. James was working the slicer when the belt suddenly jammed, sending a cascade of pork loins tumbling to the floor. Derek stormed over, his face red with frustration. "Who the hell was on the line when this happened?" he roared, eyes scanning the room. No one spoke. The younger workers glanced at James, expecting him to stay silent, to take the blame. But James stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. "Sir, I think the problem's in the main gear assembly. I noticed it slowing down earlier, but I didn't have the clearance to stop the line." Derek glared at him. "You're not maintenance, Carter. Just stick to cutting." But James didn't back down. He walked over to the machine, knelt down, and pointed. "Look here. The tension belt is loose. If we don't fix it now, we'll lose the entire batch." For a moment, the floor was silent. Derek frowned, arms crossed, but then Rebecca Miller herself appeared, clipboard in hand. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice sharp. James turned to her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ma'am, the machine's down. But I think I can fix it. I've worked on this model before at Southern Prime. If you'll let me try, I can have it running in 10 minutes. Rebecca's gaze flicked to Derek, then back to James. "Do it." James's hands moved quickly, steady despite the tension in the air. The younger workers watched in stunned silence as he adjusted the belt, tightened the screws, and re-engaged the gears. The machine hummed back to life, smooth and efficient. The line resumed. The shipment went out on time. When it was over, Rebecca approached James, a rare smile spreading across her face. "That was impressive, Mr. Carter. We could use more problem solvers like you." For the first time, James felt something shift. The other workers clapped him on the back, offering nods of respect. Even Derek, though reluctant, gave a stiff nod of approval. Climbing the ladder. From that day forward, James was no longer just the old guy or the charity hire. He was the man who'd saved the plant from a disaster. He began training others, showing them how to spot machine errors, teaching them small tricks he'd learned over decades of work. Younger employees started seeking him out for advice, and even Derek began asking for his input during daily briefings. Rebecca took notice. One day, after a particularly grueling shift, she called James into her office. "Mr. Carter, we're expanding the facility next quarter, and I'd like you to oversee the training program for the new hires. It'll mean a promotion and a raise." James stared at her, stunned. A promotion? For the first time in his life, someone was offering him a real seat at the table. He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down." Home life shifts. At home, the changes were just as profound. James's raise meant they could finally move out of the cramped apartment into a modest 2-bedroom in a better neighborhood. Jasmine, once sullen and distant, began to smile more, her grades improving. Clara, ever supportive, took up gardening in the small yard, her laughter filling the evenings as they sat on the porch together. James still worked hard, harder than ever, but for the first time, it felt like his labor was building something for his family, not just for someone else's profit. And deep down, he carried a quiet determination. He would prove to everyone who doubted him, who whispered behind his back, who called him old man, that he was more than they'd ever given him credit for. This was just the beginning. James Carter had never been the type to rest on his laurels. Even after earning his promotion and gaining respect on the floor, he knew the reality of the meat industry: one mistake, one accident, and it could all come crumbling down. So when whispers started circulating around the plant about a new corporate audit and rumors of potential layoffs, James felt a familiar chill creep up his spine. It started small, a missed shipment here, a faulty batch there. The Prime Harvest plant had been expanding rapidly, taking on new contracts, pushing the machinery to its limits. James saw the signs: machines overheating, workers skipping safety protocols, corners being cut in the name of speed. He tried to warn the supervisors. "Derek, we need to slow down the line. These machines weren't built for this pace. It's not safe." But Derek, caught up in the pressure from upper management, waved him off. "Carter, we've got quotas to hit. If you can't keep up, step aside." James clenched his jaw but kept quiet, at least for the moment. The day everything went wrong. It was a Friday, always the busiest day at Prime Harvest. The plant hummed like a beehive, the air thick with the scent of raw meat and sweat. James was overseeing the new hires and packaging when he heard the sound that made his blood run cold, a loud snap, followed by a horrifying screech. The main conveyor belt had malfunctioned, sending crates tumbling to the floor. A younger worker, Malik, just 19, slipped on the spilled fat, his hand getting caught under a moving blade. Screams erupted. James's heart stopped as he sprinted across the floor. Malik's cries were gut-wrenching, his hand mangled, blood pooling on the floor. Workers scattered in panic, and the line kept running. No emergency stop had been activated. James didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist onto the emergency shutdown button, the alarms blaring through the plant. "Call 911, he shouted, his voice commanding in the chaos. He knelt by Malik, pressing his hands firmly on the boy's arm to stop the bleeding, his own hands shaking but steady in their purpose. Derek finally appeared, eyes wide in shock. "Carter, what the hell happened?" James turned on him, his voice like a roar. "I told you this was going to happen. I told you we were pushing too hard." The fallout. Malik was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was severe. His hand was so badly injured that doctors said he'd never regain full use of it, a devastating blow for a kid just starting out. The incident sent shockwaves through Prime Harvest. The OSHA investigators arrived within days, their clipboards out, interviewing everyone. James told the truth, every detail. He described the overworked machines, the skipped maintenance checks, the pressure from management to increase output. Rebecca Miller called him into her office, her expression unreadable. James sat stiffly in the chair, feeling like a kid back in school, waiting for a scolding. But Rebecca surprised him. "James, I need you to be honest with me. How bad is it?" James didn't hold back. He laid it all out, the risks, the dangers, the unsustainable pace. Rebecca listened, nodding slowly, her face tight with concern. When he finished, she sighed, her eyes tired. "Thank you for your honesty, James. We're going to make some changes. And I want you on the safety task force, you've earned that." The strain at home. While the plant tried to recover, James felt the weight of it all at home. He'd seen too many black men scapegoated in situations like this, fired when things went wrong, silenced to protect the company's image. Clara noticed the stress in his shoulders, the way he stared at the TV without really watching. "James, you did the right thing. Don't let them make you feel like you didn't." But James couldn't shake the fear. Malik's injury haunted him, the kid's dreams of supporting his family, now shattered. One evening, as he sat on the porch, Jasmine joined him, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Daddy, are you gonna be okay at work?" James looked at her, really looked at her, and felt the fire ignite in his chest. He couldn't let this defeat him. He had to stand tall, not just for himself, but for Malik, for his family, for everyone who'd ever been told they were less because of the color of their skin. A bold move. At the next safety meeting, James did something bold, something that made Derek's face flush with anger. He proposed a full review of the plant's protocols, including mandatory maintenance logs, safety drills, and regular employee feedback sessions. "Carter, you're not management," Derek snapped. But Rebecca raised a hand, silencing him. "I think James has a point. Let's draft a proposal." It was a small victory, but it felt like a turning point. James knew there were still battles ahead, that the road wasn't suddenly smooth. But for the first time, he felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was leading, pushing for change, refusing to let the system grind him down. He would not let Malik's injury be just another statistic. He would make this place better, not just for himself, but for every single person who clocked in, sweating under those fluorescent lights, dreaming of a better life. Weeks turned into months, and though the chaos at Prime Harvest slowly settled, the scars of that terrible day remained. The plant implemented James's safety measures, albeit begrudgingly at first. New warning signs were posted, emergency stop buttons were installed at every station, and mandatory safety drills became the norm. Yet, James knew the real work wasn't just about rules, it was about hearts. He could see it in the eyes of his coworkers, the fatigue, the uncertainty, the lingering fear of being expendable. But James wasn't about to let that fear define them. An unexpected invitation. One chilly November morning, as James was finishing his shift, a sleek black car pulled up outside the plant gates. It wasn't the usual corporate vehicle. The driver stepped out and handed James an envelope with a golden seal. Inside was an invitation. The National Food Industry Safety and Innovation Conference, keynote speaker, James Carter. James stared at the words, his heart racing. This had to be a mistake. Him? A keynote speaker at one of the biggest industry events in the country? But it wasn't a mistake. Rebecca Miller had recommended him. Your story needs to be heard, James, she said when he confronted her about it. You've seen this industry from the ground up, and your voice carries weight. James had never been on a plane before, let alone flown to a hotel ballroom filled with CEOs, executives, and industry leaders. But there he was, standing at the podium, his rough, calloused hands gripping the edges, the lights blinding, a sea of faces staring back at him. He took a deep breath. And he told them everything. About Malik. About the systemic neglect. About the pressure placed on workers who were just trying to feed their families. About the black men and women in the plants who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. His voice trembled at times, but his words were powerful. They rippled across the room, leaving people leaning forward in their chairs, nodding, whispering. When he finished, the room erupted in a standing ovation. James had never felt so seen. A call that changed everything. A week after the conference, James received a phone call from a man named Victor Langston, the CEO of Heritage Meats, a multinational company with plants across the country. I watched your speech, James. I was moved. We've been looking for someone like you, someone who understands the ground level but has the vision to change things. How would you feel about joining our team as a regional safety director? James nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't just a promotion, it was a leap into a new life. He discussed it with Clara, who beamed with pride. You've earned this, baby. You fought for what's right, and people are finally seeing that. Even little Jasmine chimed in, her eyes wide. Daddy's gonna be the boss now. Giving back. James didn't forget where he came from. After settling into his new role, he started an initiative called the Malik Thomas Safety Fund, named after the young man whose injury had sparked his mission. The fund provided scholarships for kids in the community and supported families of injured workers. He also worked closely with local high schools, sharing his story, mentoring young people, teaching them about workplace safety, resilience, and never giving up on yourself. At the grand opening of the fund's community center, James stood with Clara, Jasmine, and even Malik, whose hand was now healed, though not fully functional. Malik had found his own path, becoming a youth advocate, inspired by James's fight. They cut the ribbon together, surrounded by reporters and community members. James looked out at the crowd, faces of all colors, all backgrounds, and felt a deep sense of peace. The final reflection. That night, sitting on the porch of his modest but comfortable home, James looked up at the stars. He thought about all the years he'd spent in the cold, damp cutting rooms of the old meat plant, the times he'd doubted himself, the moments when it felt like the whole world was stacked against him. But he'd held on. He'd kept going. And in the end, it wasn't about titles or paychecks or even recognition. It was about making a difference, about standing up when others were too afraid, about fighting for the ones who didn't have a voice. James Carter, the man who had once been discarded like a worn-out glove, had become a beacon, a reminder that no matter where you come from, no matter how many times life knocks you down, you can rise again. And when you do, you bring others with you.